I'm going to try and limit the amount of talking that I do and sort of intersperse it with sort of a few breakout group sessions where you can kind of formulate your ideas around what I've been talking about, because no one wants to hear someone talking for 4 hours straight, because our brains don't work like that. So hopefully we'll try and mix things up a little bit, so it's not just going to be some massive long lecture. So for those just joined, have a look at the link in the chat. There's a mural. Go on there. Ask questions. You can ask questions throughout the chat. And I'm going to share my screen so that I can sort of walk you through some of these parts in the mural, and then we'll go through it. I'll start by sharing my screen, and then I'll start walking through some of these ideas, and then we can have a chat about them and see where we go. Brilliant. So just rearranging my theme. So hopefully you can see my screen now, and you can see the mural on there with everybody there. And we're going to zoom in and have a look at this this top part here. So why now? I've started talking about this a bit already. So like, why am I sharing with this playbook with everybody to the wider community? The first one is it's only one line, which is a little bit of a sort of selfish reason, but the rest of them I think are fairly community-based. It coincides with the launch of my book, which I'm writing on the same subject, and also we have a cohort program which we're taking people through this playbooks that when people implement it, we can support and hold that space for people who are actually practicing using the things that I'm going to talk about. So there's a little bit of sort of wanting people to know about what we're doing. And then the other items are really a bit of frustration in some ways around sort of seeing the sort of patterns within our industry that I'm seeing in organizations and that I'm hearing about in the community, which are still seeing this very pushy approach, process over people approach. And, the Agile Manifesto it was all about people over process. Individuals and interactions is people over process and tools, and yet it seems that the way that we approach Agile still is very much process-led. Like, here's a framework, let's install it on top of people, etc. And so this is an approach which is a very people-first approach to organisational change, where people can derive their own process with some good guidelines, so that it isn't sort of chaos, but people can follow something and create something that's contextually relevant for them. So really, there's a bunch of things here which I'm seeing in the industry still that is happening, and I think it's time that as a community we really address these things, because people spend millions, and we spend our whole working lives on trying to make organisations amazing, and yet there's these very, very basic building blocks which are just not there, and there's this sort of frustration of these transformations not really living up to what we had hoped. And so I hope that this playbook addresses a lot of these issues. And the last one here is people are asking for a step-by-step approach. So we do a lot of pitches for organizations. We go into organizational leadership, and people want to know, what is it you're going to do? What are we going to do? We need to know what we're doing today, what we're doing tomorrow. What is this approach? But if we do a step-by-step approach, then it becomes very prescriptive. And we don't want prescriptive. We want something to evolve and emerge. The ways of working need to emerge in a complex environment. So this approach gives us a step-by-step approach that is non-prescriptive. It's a bit like if you've done professional coaching, there are a process that you can lead, or professional facilitation. You have a facilitation model, but the actual content within it can completely change depending on the coachee. Well, this is an organizational coaching conversation, so it has a structure similar to a coaching conversation where the content arises from the people in the organization. So it's non-prescriptive in the way of doing things, but it's structured in the way that we facilitate to bring the best that the organization can have. So why use it? Some of these things I've already talked about already. That they really do bring out the things that we'd hope for in agility. Things like bringing value, lowering risk, motivation, and high ownership of the actual work as well as the process. And the idea of high performance, there's been a lot of talk around what that actually means, but certainly an organization can reach a lot better performance than where an organization is with this. And it really is a people first process. It's based upon the very principles that Agile had. Not that really matters so much, but it's that we get the business results using the best of people. And the last one here is sort of measuring progress as you go. Now, being a business owner myself, I like to know what my money is doing for me and whether we're improving or whether we're not improving. And this conversation has built in it the ability to measure our progress. How well are we doing? So we'll come on to what the process actually is in a second. So what is it? As I said, it's a systematic coaching conversation. It's tried and tested. We've now used this at many organizations, and we've taught, I think, probably thousands of people to use this, at least 1,000, if not between 1,000 and 2,000, probably people to use this. And lots of people have gone off, used the playbook and reported back to us the successes that they've had or the challenges they've had with it. And that feedback has gone back into it. So it's not just a theoretical thing that we have just come up with. I mean, we kind of did that at the beginning, but it's been evolved over time with real work in real organizations. I've talked about non-prescriptive. The other thing is that it's incredibly deep. There's a lot of thought about how people interact and how people change and what the nature of complexity is, but you don't necessarily need to know that depth of it to use it. So we can go really deep and then you'll be able to do more with it, but you don't have to, you can still get a lot of benefit from it without having to, really study people and study Agile and things like that, which I thought was really important because we don't have a lot of people at the senior members of many organizations who really get it. And so we've got to work with that limitation that we find in leadership teams. And you can learn to use it quickly. Hopefully by the end of this session, you'll at least have a good idea and be able to do at least something with it, even if that would be a very top and shallow level after just an hour. So who's it for? It's really for anyone who is guiding a change process, typically with larger than a few people. So if you've got 20 people plus, then this will be a good process to work with. It's for, so that would be leaders, managers, enterprise coaches, anyone who's working with complex problems. There is a rule. We don't have many rules, but the rule is that no one can decide someone else's way of working without them having a part of the co-creation. So this is really to protect us against thinking that this is the one right way, and we're going to go and tell everybody else how they should be working. Because that's the thing that we're trying to avoid. Otherwise, you could just go and grab a framework off the shelf and install that. So that's the one rule. So what is it? What is this framework? What is this conversation? So we don't have this is about as this diagram has sort of has served us well. We've never had it drawn up by a proper graphic designer. This was actually done on a flip chart and has been photographed, and that's pretty much what we've been using for the last few years. At some point, no doubt we'll get someone to draw it up professionally. But so it all starts. Well, first of all, if there's any questions or anything that you want to add, make sure that you add them into the this mural, and then I can pick them up. So as I'm going along, any questions, stick them in there. Okay, so I'll walk through this, and then we'll have a bit of a breakout and think about it. So we start up here with pressure from market, and this is really a placeholder for two things. It's the changing environment that our organization finds ourselves in, and internal politics. They're the two driving forces for change. And we need to start with the why. So we start with why. What is this thing? We need to figure out what it is that we're actually doing this change for. We're not doing it for Agile's sake. We're not doing it just because it's cool. There's got to be some underlying reason why the business needs to make some kind of change. Why are we investing in this? So we need to figure that out. And we typically do that with the leadership team. So we work with the leadership team and we align around what it is that the business change is for. It's quite amazing to me how many organizations embark on these massive Agile transformations, but nobody really knows why. And I mean, it's great as a coach being told sort of go forth and do good stuff. And we have had sort of, in the past, we've had sort of engagements like that. And it's brilliant because you can just go forth and do good stuff. But what real benefit is it that you're actually doing? And this always links it into that. So there's a big piece of work which I'll come on to around leadership. Many leaders in our organizations, or whatever level that we're operating on, it doesn't have to be the board of directors. It's not in the leadership in the term of the playbook is sort of the lowest level of leadership that is required to have the influence and the ability to change structure in the way we work. We've got to have somebody who has got the authority to be able to change how people work. So we need at least that level, because if you haven't got that, how can you change anything? So a lot of the leadership we find don't have the mindset enabling them to solve the complex problems that are in front of them. So typically there's some work that we do around coaching around leadership, aligning them around the why, and seeing what kind of behaviors and things that they need to change in order to meet their own business objectives. So there's some work that we do with the leadership team to start with. Once we have the leadership aligned, I'll go into this, this is really high level, right? So once we have got a leadership aligned and we know what we're doing and why we're doing it, then we ask a very simple question. If we as leaders change the way that we behave and the actions that we're doing, will this solve the problem? And this is the problem we defined at the beginning, the why. Now, in most cases, the answer is no. It isn't enough that we just change the way we're working. We need other people to change the way they're working too. So we look to see what we can do as leaders, and then we ask for help. And this is a big step for many leaders. So this is really where the mindset comes in of how can we ask for help with this challenge. So we do some work around that, and then we see who are the people that are needed to change the way they work to solve this problem. And then we look, if that's too many people, then we can break the problem down into smaller parts. And there's an art form to that, a bit like many years ago when we used to break work down into stories, or still break work down into stories. But I remember many years ago, there was always that pushback of, oh, we can't possibly break this work down. It's 3 months worth of work and no one can make it smaller. But of course, we've got many, many techniques to break down stories now. And I can't even remember the last time we couldn't break a story down beyond about 3 days worth of work for one person, and that can be large. So it's the same with this. You can break the problem down with the number of people until we reach about a sort of 120 or less mark. And then what we do is we ask for help, and we do this. This is where we move on to this right-hand wheel. So we've come down here, pressure from market, we align leadership, and then we move over to this wheel here. Now this right-hand wheel here, this circle, is the engine of the playbook.
Hello.
Hiya. So what we do is we always start with now. We run a sensing workshop, and it can be with small teams. I might just put people on mute if you wouldn't mind, Corey, so I can speak. Thank you. And so we always start with now. So we map out what the current situation is, and then we use sense-making techniques for everybody to sense-make where they are. So this is like a diagnostic, but instead of a diagnostic being run by the few people through interviews or observing how people are working, instead, we run a workshop where people figure out what's going on for themselves. So we call this an intervention diagnostics. And through this, what we do, and so an example of this is either we would hold a big room facilitation when we could all get together, or we hold small team groups, and now online we either do it with big groups or small groups, but we work on one model, and different teams and in different meetings can feed into that one model to build up a current state of where everybody is now relative to the problem we're trying to solve. And then we use sense-making techniques that people can sense-make, and they themselves define an experiment of what they want to do in their ways of working. And that experiment, this defined experiment, is always defined by the people who are going to change the way they work. So they define their own ways of working. And the action part here is actually making the change. They do the thing that's different. They change whatever the way of working, and then we test it to see whether that change has moved us closer or further away to the business objective that we were trying to solve. So this wheel, we go around this many, many times, and it slowly drives. You can think of it as like a small cog turning very fast, and then it slowly turns the bigger cog on the left-hand side. As we change and do experiments in the ways we're working, it changes the structure on the processes. You can think of structure like processes, the ways of working, the things that you can see around you, what meetings we have, all those kind of things, and who works together. It slowly changes the structure, and this changes the culture of the organization. And culture follows structure. So some culture can come from leadership changing the way that they behave, but most culture change will come from the way that we're structured and aligned and the dependencies within the organization. So this wheel turns this wheel. So we work with the team. Now, the reason why this is effective is because if you think of complexity, if you think of it like a tree, the trunk of a tree is, you've got one trunk going out into millions of little tiny branches and twigs. And if you think that each one of those little twigs is one part of the puzzle, each person in the organization has one part of the puzzle, one part of the truth of what's happening. And so any centralized decision-making in a complex environment is going to not allow those people to be heard. Part of their truth is going to be diminished or pushed aside. But with this method, with people defining experiments, then all of that is taken into account. So the existing ways of working, the work that's going on, is taken into account whilst you're defining the experiments to solve the new business problem that you're working on. So that way, people aren't marginalized and things aren't missed. And also, because people are defining their own experiment, there's a huge level of ownership and excitement around the change program, rather than the sort of negative sort of comments you get or the disempowerment from sort of centralized approach. So this whole model is wrapped in this thing called this holding environment. And we've also changed that actually. I refer that more actually as a high trust environment. So this is required, and some of the experiments can be to improve your trust. And we've got certain models and certain facilitation techniques that we use to build a higher trust environment, because we do need people to be able to participate and be able to share what they're doing. And so all of it kind of is built into this, facilitation techniques to increase that trust and courage to speak out. So that's the most highest level. So I thought probably maybe just a quick example, and then so walk it through the quick example, and then I'd like to sort of go into breakout rooms with the very first part of it, and then we can discuss what this would look like, say, your organization. So as an example, we working with a smallish bank, and the bank was already doing extremely well using some agile techniques, but also had a lot of regulatory work and a lot of legacy stuff that they needed to bring up to speed. And the challenge is that they wanted everybody to work in an agile way, and that they were trying to push this a model which a large consultancy had brought in. This was causing quite a lot of unhappiness. And so we were asked to say, look, why isn't this agile working for us at the bank? And so the first thing we did is we said, right, well, let's make sure that we're actually trying to do agile or do whatever it is for the right reasons. So we sat down with the board of directors and we said, what are you trying to achieve? And they came up with a bunch of stuff which was to do with stay at the top, keep on innovating, and get things out to customers quicker. But at the same time, internally, there was a lot of attrition in the teams, and they wanted to make sure that people weren't just leaving. A lot of expertise was going. They wanted to make sure that people were happy. So we sat down the leadership, we aligned them on the why, and then we went wider. And what that particular organization didn't want us to do large scale activities. They wanted us to work with the different teams. So we got the different teams together and we started running a diagnostic on what was it that they felt, and what did they see about the change that they were going through and their current situation. And we built a huge shared model where each team contributed what they wanted to share about how they saw and what was going on for them right now. And so we started with now. And out of that came the craziest experiments, which we would never have been able to define as a consultancy, a third-party consultancy. The things that they defined was that they realized that they had no cross communication between product owners. They didn't really feel that their senior management team was a team. The vision had somehow got lost amongst some of the in the communication. And so some people didn't really know what they were doing, or why they were doing it rather. And then another experiment was around, or another issue that they found was around they were finding that they couldn't find the balance between long-lived teams and the flexibility needed to share people and limited skill set resource. So we helped them shape these problems into outcomes that they wanted, and then define hypothesis around what they could do to solve these problems. And they themselves created experiments that they could try to see if changing the way of work would solve these problems. And so we ran concurrent experiments over a period of, well, some a few weeks, some a few months. And then by changing the way they were working, they then go back and regularly assess, do we feel like we're a team? Are we able to get things out? Is the staff leaving rate falling, or is it the same, or is it getting more? So we're measuring what we're doing around those original problems. And what we found is doing this, we uncover all sorts of other problems, the elephants in the room, which nobody wants to talk about. And creating a safe space as we go allows people to express those in a way. So we have this format called unmet needs, where you can express issues as unmet needs rather than you this, you that, or that person over there's a problem. It's like, what need have you got that's unmet? And so we used a technique using that so that people could safely express what they needed, which gave a much higher level of ownership and communication across the organization. So there's a whole bunch of experiments that continue to run that come out of this cycle of experiments. And each time it goes round, you start with now again, because the now has changed. And typically the first time we run this, it's quite a big start with now, and then it's very small increments to update where we are. So that is a really high, there's a lot of information there, but it's a really high level of kind of this sort of conversation which we have with the organization and the different parts. And there's a lot more depth in it, but I would like to sort of take you down to the bottom part here in this, zoom out a bit, in this step. So these steps are what I've just talked through. So these are not additional steps. These are the steps I've just talked through, but I've put it in step-by-step approach just because it helps. Now, you go round the steps in a loop continuously, as in continuous improvement. So what I thought we could do is have a little session in breakout rooms, and the questions that I would like to ask you, so that you can have a talk about this and see whether so I thought if we do this a couple of times, then these step-by-steps, rather than it being this massive piece of information, we'll try and break it down, make sense of each part of it, so that by the end, you've got a much clearer view of the whole process. And the first thing I'd like to look at is these first steps that we do when we arrive in the organization or coaching begins. And this is define and align on the problem, turn it into a desired outcome. So this is starting with the why. What do we want out of this? What's the reason? And then what we do is once we know that, we build an alliance or ways of working, a bit like a coaching contract if you're a professional coach, but it's not like a legal contract. It's like, how are we going to work together? What happens when things go wrong? How do we want to behave around solving this problem? So in the breakout rooms, I was thinking what we could do is, if you have a think about these three questions: what challenges do your organizations face? Do you know? Are they discussed? Is there really a proper understood and well-versed why in your organization? Do you feel that the leadership, if you're on the leadership team, then fantastic, you can speak directly, or do you feel that the leadership team are aligned around those problems? Is everybody aware of what they are? And do your leadership team and you, perhaps, if you're a coach, with the teams that you're coaching, have a ways of working alliance? So it'd be really interesting to sort of see, are we aligned on why we're in the organization or why you're making the change? And are leadership aligned? And do we have some kind of alliance or ways of working around solving those issues? So it'd be really good to sort of go into breakout rooms, have a discussion, and then when we come back, if one or two would like to sort of share any insights or anything that might have come out of that, that'd be really useful for the group. Fantastic. It's always a bit abrupt when you get taken out of a room mid-conversation and all that. Any insights or anything that anyone wants to share about what's happened in the last few minutes or over this session?
Ricardo, please, you.
Sure. So it's interesting that within our group, regarding the challenges that our organization are facing, we saw a pattern that one thing which is recurring is a very big lack of alignment between strategy and execution. In my personal case, I'm going through a scale-up process, not me, the company. And so this is getting worse and worse with more hiring and so on. But it's a common theme.
Yeah. It is a real challenge because there's different learning loops in each part. You've got execution, operations, you've got strategic, and you've got vision. And we have a sort of a different alignment process for the three different spaces, and they feed into each other. So we really want to understand what the vision is, but we also need strategy. So I think of like vision as like kind of why. Strategy is kind of like a bunch of different contexts that we might be able to meet our vision in, and then operations is like, how do we take one of those strategies and actually make it work on a day-to-day? And a lot of when we look at the sort of frameworks and things, often in Agile we talk about purpose and why, and we often talk about operations, but quite often strategy is completely missed out. And so I think that making sure that all three are aligned is absolutely key. Any other things that anyone would like to share?
Yeah, maybe about the strategy. We discussed the fact that depending on where you find yourself in the organization, it can get very hard to reach the right level to change things for real or change the structure. And even so, sometimes you get ideas that you want to bring up, but at the same time, they're busy doing like some kind of transformation, some kind of strategic exercise that is coming down on you, and then it clashes at times. So yeah, and often we were talking about industry. It's sometimes industry dependent. Fintech, for instance, obviously always goes first choice for Big Four, and then yeah, it often clashes with what people think at in the organization.
There was one of the questions actually in the thing about how does this compete with some of the approaches from the Big Four or large consultancies in general rather than just much the Big Four, but so we try not to do too much pitch work because a lot of people ask for us in the first place. So we generally get pulled into organizations, which gives us sort of a nice kind of people are already aligned with the way we're doing. But when we do pitches, we have won against, I'm not going to mention any names, but some of the big companies, we have won something. Sometimes we lose, sometimes we win. But it depends really on whether people understand the coaching approach or whether they like what the people, it's mostly people rather than coaching. Often when it's HR led, we quite often are chosen because they kind of get this idea of engagement and people ownership and people being asked, and involved in the process. So yeah, I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't when we're doing that pitch level. But in terms of this playbook is really for people who are guiding the change process and who have access to leadership or senior management who are able to change the way that people are working. No, not getting them to make that change, but you need to have the authority so that you can make the changes. Because if you can't change the way people are working, how can you move an organization anywhere? And one of the biggest frustrations that I find is that when I'm feeling in the community is that many Agile coaches are employed as Agile coaches and have no real authority or remit to actually do much at all. And that's an incredibly frustrating place to find oneself. And then, many times I've heard, but I just don't have access to the leadership to do the kind of things that you're suggesting. And that doesn't mean that the things I'm suggesting don't work. They just won't work for you in that situation, in that role. And that's something which I think is a hard thing for people to find out in a way. that the role that they're in is actually not going to be that effective because they don't have access. But that's the reality of organisational change. You've got to be able to have that access. So let's so what we've done so far is we're just working through these steps, and what we were looking at was the first 1 and 2 steps, which was really about aligning leadership and making ways of working. Was there anyone who has got a ways of working sort of contract or alignment of behaviours with their leadership team or in a leadership team? Let's see one hand. How's that? How is that? How did that come about?
You're asking me, Simon?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, I think we're competitors to you. We're also an agile consultant company, and we've developed our own, I guess, culture and values, which we measure for ourselves. We track them on a monthly basis. We shape them probably on an annual basis to make sure that we're behaving in the way that we believe is aligned to our vision. So we rate ourselves monthly against that, and then have discussions about how to get closer to our goal.
And do you have sort of a ways of working with your client, so that your client, what happens when things go wrong, sort of thing, and it's sort of like a setup, sort of a bit like a coaching contract, but a kind of alliance, if you like, around how people behave.
Yes, yeah, we operate similar principles for the way that we engage our clients as well.
Brilliant. So this is something that's really key. I've noticed that the ICF, the International Coaching Federation, people have started to get certified in professional coaching. And one of the things that you have to do when you're is adhere to their code of ethics. And the very first ethic in the ICF code of ethics is that you need to be able to explain to your clients what it is you're doing, how you're going to work, and create a kind of contract with them in the way that you're going to behave. And so if we've got agile coaches who are working with ICF, who are ICF qualified, and not creating a ways of working document, it's kind of breaking the code of ethics. So a lot of people in leadership say, I haven't got time for any of this. Well, that would be a red flag to me, that it's going to be very difficult to enter into a coaching conversation. So I know that there's some hands up in terms of asking questions and things. But I'm going to go on to the next thing now. If you have got a question, stick it into the questions box, and then I will do my best to answer those. So the next section, the next part, which I'll just share my screen, which is the, I did notice that one person rightly mentioned that there's a lot of mouse movement over the things that I'm presenting. Next time I will take a screenshot before sharing so that there isn't lots of movement. So if you wouldn't mind moving your mouses off, that'd be fantastic, just while I sort this. So the next thing,
there should be a way that you could
leave
it. Yeah, you could deactivate it.
How do you do that?
If you click on your face at the bottom, you should be able to click off.
Right here.
Yeah, and you should be able to don't show me cursors.
Where's that? Don't show me. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and that way you
fantastic. I didn't even know there was a menu there. That's brilliant. I've just learned something. Good. So excuse me. So the next thing is we ask leaders, once we're aligned, what are they doing about this change themselves? What behavioral change are they prepared to make this work? If we're going to change culture, how can we expect culture to change if leaders themselves don't make change? Too much leaders think that they can delegate agile to a bunch of other people, and it's not that they need to change themselves or do something. So that's the next step. What can leaders do to change, to make the right environment that other people can thrive in and do well in? And so we have some work around that. We won't go into a breakout room just on that one point. The next point is, so now once we've got alignment and leadership have looked at what they can do to change, that's when we invite others and ask for help. And that's when we start doing facilitation exercises with others to try to bring other people into the problem space and the outcome space and see whether they can come up with experiments for themselves in the ways of working. And that's going around this loop here. So this is 5, 6, and 7. So what the next kind of things that I'd like us just to have go into breakout rooms, have a quick discussion before we come back and do questions and answers at the end, is on these questions here. And this is around, I'd be really interested to hear some insights into the programs that you're working on. If you are in an Agile change program or initiative or working with Agile ways of working, do the people in your organization get a say in the way that they work? How is that happening? How are people having a say? And are you running experiments? And how are you measuring those? Are you actually measuring what you're doing and the change that you're actually doing? And so all this effort and work that we're doing to change the organization, does anybody measure it to see whether it's actually effective? And if so, how? And again, if you could have a think about these questions, share some things, and any insights or any answers to these questions, do come back and share after the breakout room, because I'd really like to hear how other people are doing these things if you are. So I'll leave the question, I'll stop sharing because I can't get the breakout rooms otherwise. At least that's my limited technical knowledge. So we're going to breakout room same time, and then please do share when you come back again. So again, it'll be 8 minutes, and I'll see you again in 8 minutes.
To raise growth items, and they can be team growth items, things that they can influence themselves and work on and build on, or it could be organizational growth items where they're saying, leadership, we need help with this. This is what's getting in our way, or this is what needs to happen. So that's been very insightful for myself as a coach to kind of help facilitate that conversation, but also then facilitate conversations with leadership as well. So that's and that has led to experiments and insights into data around team size and all this kind of stuff. So it's been interesting.
Oh, fascinating. It's always good to hear about different tools and things that people use for these things. Do you know whether, what I'm really keen on is measuring against the actual underlying business problems or business outcomes that you're looking for, rather than measuring against some sort of idealized agile? How does it work with that? Is it?
Yeah, so there's a performance dimension that we have access to that talks around time to market, quality, and things like that. So we have various KPIs that are associated with how much we deliver to our customers. And so what we've been able to look at here is our time to market's really kind of poor. So what's getting in the way? Well, as teams say, environment stability is terrible, or the ability to deliver code quickly into the production is really slow and cumbersome. And so that's allowed us to actually create growth items at an enterprise level. So at an enterprise level, we now have to, we've got to chip away at this now. This is going to take many, many quarters. This is like, it's like breaking down a big boulder now, but that's kind of where we are in some of our transformation.
Fantastic, brilliant. Anything that can show a mirror of what's going on that people can sense make around it and then iteratively navigate their way to a better place. Fantastic.
The downside we have is that there are leaders now that are going, well, we're never going to get up to this. Why don't we change the questions? No, that's not what we. Yeah, so I get a little disheartened when I hear a leader say, well, we need to reword the question. It's like, no, let's not do that, because we can benchmark against other companies in our industry as well. So.
But it's one of the three suboptimal ways to achieve your goals. Lower the goals.
Yeah, exactly.
Anyone else, anything that they've got that they would like to share?
So Simon, I like Holger here. I think we in our group discuss it very often. There are some very good stories on the team level. So measuring the results, so with value points, OKRs, and so on and so forth. So on a team level, and it's very often, as I see, it is a question how the Agile coaches, Scrum Masters are organized and how they bring it up. I see in more and more companies that there are some very good stories. They share on a team level, Agile coach level, Scrum Master level, and then they bring it up that they think, oh, there are good ideas how to measure, and then they bring it up, but it's not really top down. I see also some companies offering more and more software with a based on the budgeting and prioritization of the whole project portfolio and so on. So there's something coming up, how to measure all these experiments. So there's something going on, but I think the good ideas and the pressure is coming more from the teams to change something and how to do it. That's how I see it, at least in the companies I'm working for.
Yeah, I've often seen there's pressure coming from the teams, pressure from leadership, pressure from, so often there's pressure from all sorts of different areas. And with this approach, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get those different pressures to be heard. So how can they be heard, and how can we navigate across a bunch of people who all have their own needs, all of the things that they want? Often those needs might conflict, especially around areas of complexity, whereas some people don't see things as complex, they see things as ordered. So if we just plan more, if we just budget more, if we just put more detail in it, then we'll be more successful. Well, that's not complexity thinking, that's ordered thinking. So but there are reports and regulatory things that expect us to be in some ways ordered, especially when you get up to sort of things like financial reporting and things like this. What do you perceive the company's performance is going to be in the next year? And the markets need this kind of thing. So how do we project out like that when we've got an uncertain, chaotic world? And so you've got lots of different needs, and using some of the techniques through this, we can kind of bring people together and get those needs to be heard, and then work together to try and navigate what solution can we come up that meets most, if not all, of those needs. It's a complex environment with lots of different people. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so let's go on to the questions that we've got in the mural, and then we can hopefully, that if there's anything that's sort of confusing or people are wondering what is this thing or what's he talking about, then put the thing in there, and then we can hopefully uncover some of that stuff. Corey, did you want to sort of read them out, and then I don't have to sort of navigate through that and.
Yeah, sure, no problem. There's just a few I've picked out from the chat that was asked earlier. Let's see what we have here. Matthew asked, still seeing frameworks used. Is this a bad thing, Simon? What's your thought process?
Yeah, I think for me, it's about whether it's framework first or whether it's people first. You know, there's nothing inherently wrong with frameworks, but are we deriving this from the real business need and putting what is important into the organization, or are we installing a framework which was most likely optimized for another organization in another situation? If I hear one more company that's adopting the Spotify model, then I'm just going to go mad. You know, it's like that was made for their context and their time, for their situation, and it's a fantastic thing for them. But what I like about frameworks is that there's so much thought that's gone into these things. We can learn a huge amount from what's gone into SAFe, in LESS, and all these other things. And there's so much incredible things that have gone into that. That's that expertise. We need that expertise because that's how we write good experiments. If we don't have that knowledge and that expertise of lean and agile, then we're going to write rubbish experiments, and then we're just going to be wandering around doing random experiments, and we're not going to know, we're going to have a much harder time moving the organization in the right direction. So it's about people first rather than frameworks being good or bad. Does that help?
So our next question here, it says, how do you know when you and the leaders amongst them are aligned? All too often, initial alignment turns out to be a misunderstanding.
I think with this process, it's a constant, everything's in circles, if you see. So we go round and we're constantly looking at where are we now and what experiments can we do. And normally that misalignment comes out in some kind of unmet need or some kind of conflict or some kind of what we call elephant in the room, which isn't being spoken about. And then we quickly find that there's some kind of misalignment, or sometimes it's simply that we're using the same words and meaning different things. But a lot of that comes out when we do the start with now. So that start with now is quite a comprehensive view of what's actually happening in the organization now, and then facilitating those experiments. So you go quite deep and look at it from different views. So one of the views could be the integral model, which is the I, we, it, it's. I'm not going to explain that whole model now, but that's one view, one model of making sure you look at the problem from different views. So by doing that, you get a much higher chance of alignment. And then because it's iterative, if you're not aligned, well, the next experiment, you align. So as soon as these things become obvious, then you can address them. Does that help?
Thanks, Simon. Rich Harris asks, how long does the holding process take?
Forever. You continue. So what I mean by holding is this trust environment. It's all constantly building a trust environment. It's something you can't let go of. It's just something that you're always working on. It's how we show up inside. There's so much hierarchy and what I call a mainstream narrative that happens in organizations that we have to constantly try to dissolve the mainstream narrative so that we get a narrative from all of the different people in the organization, which creates a collective narrative. So what I mean by that is that if you think about anywhere there's conflict, anywhere where someone's marginalized, pushed aside, it's because you have a main narrative, a mainstream narrative, and there are voices that don't get heard. This causes all sorts of hierarchy, and I'm not talking about organizational hierarchy, I'm talking about hierarchy inside. It creates massive amounts of privilege, which the people who hold that privilege are often completely blind to. So this process, this collective equal voice, start with now, allows everybody to speak, and that creates a much stronger holding environment. So it's continually growing the more the process goes, and the more we uncover that mainstream narrative and privilege, the more we can work on it to share it about a bit by creating multiple narratives. I don't know if that makes any sense. Hopefully.
Another question here from, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Ivelo, asks, are there any experiments and hypothesis templates that you can recommend?
We do have one. I haven't got it here. Perhaps I can post it somewhere. We have those, we teach that on our, I didn't put it in here because there's only so much you can do in an hour. I've already done quite deep, but we have a sort of hypothesis, what we're doing, when the hypothesis is proved right or wrong, a time limit, things like that. So we do have a template. Perhaps I can share it somewhere. We share those on our courses, and we work with them a lot in the courses and on the Cohort program, where pretty much everything we do, we're using these templates over and over again. And it's a real art form to write good experiments. It's like writing a good story. It takes a while for you to, or for one to get the hang of it. So yeah, and perhaps we can share that on the AWA resources or something.
Yep.
Cool.
Another question here from Robert asked, I guess this is an open question to everyone as well, but pointing at you as well, Simon. It says, has anyone experienced in using lean value tree to align on the strategic level with strategic bets broken down to smaller experiments on the tactical levels?
I haven't. Anyone else?
Okay, yeah, okay. Yeah, I found this actually, it's a good approach maybe to align also on the pressure of the market to have more top level experiment already defined. And then you have cascading ones. Let's say if you align on a C-level in a bigger organization, then you probably need to have a top-level experiment like in a strategic goal, in a strategic bet. And it offers a bit of a way how to break it down and also give autonomy to the teams underneath and to the different functions to experiment for their way. But they're still aligned on a common strategic bet and a strategic goal, also with a proper hypothesis on top of it. But I've never used it, so I'm just reading about it and thinking about how to use it. But I think it would be probably open the discussion for the pressure from the market to document it in a better way.
Thanks, Robert. That's really interesting. We have the concept of working with the leadership team first, but then we try to keep that leadership team intact, working with who they help with. I think one of the best ways of describing it is like one of those little desk toys from the 1980s, the little Newton's cradle, I think they were called, where you pick up one ball and it goes tsh, tsh. There's a really annoying toys that once you pull one in someone's desk and it starts clacking, you know, oh my God, I've got to try and stop the thing. But one of those, if you think of an organization from leadership all the way down like a vertical slice, try and work with a vertical slice rather than sort of the horizontal layers. That's kind of the way that I've kind of looked at the experiments, like going in a vertical layer. And then you might not need the layers of experiments, but yeah, sometimes they are. Try and join people together rather than creating anything that creates silos or separation. It just creates more dependency and more lag and less flow. So we want to make sure that the way we craft our experiments doesn't increase silo behavior, I guess. Okay, so let's keep on going then, and then we can see. I guess probably for another 10 minutes or so.
Yeah. Next question asks, you place culture close to the leadership cycle through communities of practice. We see culture change as well. What role do these communities have in your view in culture change and in the AWA playbook?
So communities of practice are an organizational design element. So when we're designing an organization, communities of practice are part of that design. You can only optimize an organization along one line. And we try to do that around what we call a real team, which is anywhere up to 120 people. A real team would be something like, the closest that I can think of is the large scale Scrum team. That would be the closest sort of thing from a framework. And then a communities of practice allows people who are not optimized in that big team to collaborate and align and learn about particular subjects. So for example, we don't have a team called the browser team or the search team or the payment engine team. We have the team who serves the customer. But how do you then learn about payments? How do you go deep into that specialization of skill set? Because we're taking that skill set specialization apart and creating cross-functional teams. So what do we replace the deep specialization with? Well, that's communities of practice. That's how we get around that deep alignment around certain topics. So it's designed so that you can optimize around flow, but still has deep specialization within community of practice.
Thanks, Simon. Next question. What does one do to get to the point where leadership invites coaches to coach them or are being open to being coached?
What does one do to invite leaders to coach them? Anyone else got any ideas on that?
I'm going to just add, it's right place, right time, right moment. I think it's very relationship based when a senior leader reaches out for coaching support.
Generally for me, it's through networking. So they tend to find out because you've coached someone or you've coached a leader, and they get interested because they hear good things about it, and then you get invited. That's certainly my experience.
Brilliant, thank you. Another approach as well is to have coaching as a strategy within the organization. So it's something that we encourage, is to create strategy. Part of the strategy is coaching embedded in leadership, and then it becomes the norm to ask for coaching. Tony, did you have your hand up? Well, next you had your hand up for ages.
I did. I was just going to comment that in organisations where coaching isn't the norm, and not as a qualified professional coach, I think most leaders would expect coaching to mean professional coaching, not agile coaching. So be careful. So my last thing I would do is call it coaching. But what leaders might be up for is some help to work on process improvement, or by any other name but coaching. That they might be up for a conversation, and then we can follow up with one-to-one to tell them how it's going if we're working with their people, for example.
Thanks, Tony. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
I'm just chip in a little bit on that one. Just
yeah,
quickly.
of course.
Something, I'm not working with senior leadership where I am, but kind of business leadership people. And what I'm actually doing is, I haven't mentioned the word coaching at all, but it's just during all of our normal work meetings, I see the behavior that needs to change or we want to change. So I'm just using work and kind of socializing the ideas of, here, look here, this isn't working, this is something else we could do. Not using agile words particularly or anything like that. And what I'm starting to, so it's about socializing the ideas, and now I'm seeing them use my phrases and trying to get other people to change. So it's kind of like little slow ripple effects out, and I'm finding that quite effective where I am at the moment.
Stealth coaching.
Stealth coaching, exactly
yeah.
what I was thinking of as well.
Yeah, that
I mean,
I'm finding quite effective now.
Yeah, I mean, I'm seeing, I'm concerned at the moment that sort of it's not going all the way up to the exec. And I know from historic experience, our exec have a tendency to set hard deadlines. And what can you do if you know you're not operating at the level of the organisation you need to be?
Yeah, I mean, it's always good to be truthful to oneself about what influence you have got and what's going on, and not sort of, I don't know, just be really honest and in the moment about where you are and what you're doing, and see what benefit you can have, and is that appropriate and right for you. I always think, I always think of these two questions. Is anybody listening to me? And if they are, do they have the influence or the will to do any of the things or some of the things that I suggest? If either of those two questions is no, then we're kind of wasting our time. But in terms of trying to get higher up the organization, it's not really something I've got that much direct experience about, because I've been sort of either independent or running AWA now for well over a decade. So typically when I get asked in, I'm asked in at the right level. And I know there's another question here saying what times you wouldn't take a coaching role. Well, we turn down as much work as we win, because there are quite often when we are asked to come in and install Agile. We've been asked to install all sorts of things over the years, and if we feel that it's not people led, then we won't take the work, because I don't like to do something which I don't think is likely to be successful. I don't have any experience or knowledge about making process-led transformations work well, so it would be unethical for me to pretend that I did. It has to be people first, and for that there does have to be a level of engagement around leadership change. Because if you think about leadership, what do leaders do? Is a leader, I mean, you can ask the question, is what you do effective in the organization? Are you having an impact in the organization? And if the answer is no, then like kind of, why are you there? What's that leader doing? Of course, they're never going to say that. The answer is yes, of course I have an impact in the organization. And so would it be reasonable to say that if you keep doing the same things, the organization is going to continue doing the same things? Whereas if you want change in the organization, it would be fairly reasonable to suggest that you have to change to get those changes in the organization. And I don't think it's that rocket science to have that conversation with them, to say, the question then comes, okay, then, well, what do you want me to change? What would I change to make this world that you're talking about, kind of thing? And then we can start talking to them about, well, what challenges do you face? What's the real things? What matters to you? And now we're beginning the coaching process. So it's like, if you want to change, you've got to start with the leadership. Otherwise, leadership would be meaningless. Anyway, that's that. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
We still have a few more questions, but I realize we're coming a bit close to our cut-off time. So it says, I have another question.
Any easy ones, sorry.
There's so many. How do you overcome the C-suite bias of preferring to listen to big consultancies and ignoring the other approaches?
Don't overcome it. They either choose or they don't. Mostly we do end up going into organizations where someone somewhere has gone in and screwed up. But I'm sure that sometimes big organizations do good jobs. There might well be that big organizations have done fantastic jobs. We don't get to see those because they wouldn't need us, because they're doing the work. If we generally just get pulled where we get pulled, we don't, I mean, in pitches, I always say, I never put anyone else down. Other people do their stuff. All we can do is look at our stuff and try and make it the best it can be. If people resonate with that, then we'll get pulled to where we're supposed to be. That's kind of my approach to competition, really. Just be the best you can be and try and collaborate with everybody.
Someone in the comments has asked, when is the book out? I think that's an easy question.
Book is already out. It is chapter by chapter.
Yeah.
There's a link down the bottom. Thanks for asking that. There's a link down the bottom of this mural. It's on Medium, and I'm releasing them as I write them, which is roughly once every week or every 2 weeks per chapter. There's 5 chapters out. The next one's just about to be out, and I've now chosen a cover as well. So we even got a cover for it. So I reckon the whole thing will be finished by June, but you can read along chapter by chapter if you wish on Medium, and it covers this playbook, and it covers up many other things as well, the thinking behind it, and lots of other stuff too. So yeah, that's my plug for that.
I'll put it in the chat for you guys. Another question says, what are the 3 mindset beliefs? They sound very important.
Read the book.
Great plug. That was good. Another question, how long does it take to get to step 6 typically?
Blimey, how long does it take to get to step 6? 2 weeks, a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, something like that. Not long. It's about, as long as you've got access to the leadership team, things move quickly. Nobody wants to be hanging around for months. People want to change the way, people want to get on with things, but you need alignment first. Otherwise, we're just doing random stuff. A couple of weeks, 3 weeks. sometimes sooner, sometimes even in the first week of us being there, we're starting to do experiments with teams.
Another question here, it says, what can you do if people cannot make sense of the situation?
People always make sense of a situation. People are full of like wanting to bring their own opinions and things. Yeah, it just doesn't happen. People always make sense of something. What is challenging is to actually hold people in a place long enough where they're not making sense, to absorb the information before they come to conclusions. So it's actually not so much that the trouble is getting people to make sense of it, it's holding them off as long as possible before they make sense of it, so that they can get as much information as possible, so that when they do make sense of it, it's something which is more accurate to something that's relevant, I'd say.
Brilliant.
The hardest thing is getting people to write good experiments. That's the challenge. But once you crack that, the rest of it just flows really well. That's the hard part.
What is the recommended people size limit for the holding environment?
120, something like that. 120, 150. You can do it as larger temporarily, but as an ongoing thing, I've found about that. My favorite spot is about 80, but really about 120, I think. 80, I can get to know everyone's face. After that, you start to lose track of who everyone is. Are we done?
Someone asked here, where can you get a copy of the playbook?
The book, or you can come on a course. I guess in the book, which is now public, there's the actual screenshot of the playbook, so you can get it from there. The mural, you've got the mural, you can screenshot it from there. Also, if you, this is the last plug of the session, if you do want to learn about this more, we do have 2 training classes where we teach this in massive depth. And then after that, we have a cohort program which runs for 9 months, where people come on and they actually do the work in their organization and get coached and mentored and held throughout that whole process. And so they can really implement this kind of coaching approach. That's the only plug. Okay, I think we're done. We're half past. Thank you so much, everybody, for asking all those questions and also being here and participating. Thank you for that. If there are any more questions, do feel free to email us as well, or I'm on LinkedIn as well. Feel free to connect, and would love to carry on the conversation. I'm happy to stay on for about 10 minutes or so, but let's formally end the session so that everyone can feel like they can leave, and then we'll end it there. But I'm happy to hang around for 10 minutes for anyone else who wants to. Thank you so much, everybody, and stay safe.